At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the glass doors of Harrington Tower whispered open, and Jonathan Reed stepped inside as if the building itself might judge him. The marble lobby gleamed under soft recessed lights, spotless and indifferent. Outside, the city surged awake, horns, crosswalk signals, delivery trucks double parked along the curb, but in Jonathan's chest, everything felt suspended, like the breath before a fall. He had built Reed Urban Developments from a two-person operation into a skyline-defining force in less than 10 years. The company's logo crowned 3 high-rise towers across the river, and its waterfront redevelopment project had once been hailed as visionary. But vision was fragile when funding evaporated. A stalled permit, a spike in material costs, and a lender that abruptly tightened terms had turned momentum into freefall. For 3 weeks, he had negotiated, pleaded, recalculated. For 3 nights, he had barely slept. Today, at 8 sharp, he was supposed to sign the restructuring agreement that would save the company. The conference center upstairs had been booked unexpectedly, so the meeting had been moved to the cafe adjoining the building. Neutral ground, they had called it. Jonathan suspected it was strategic, less formal, less theatrical, fewer witnesses. The cafe smelled of fresh espresso and warm pastry dough, its tall windows capturing the pale gold of early light. A handful of early professionals tapped at laptops, unaware that a corporate life hung in the balance at a corner table. 3 attorneys sat waiting, dark suits immaculate, briefcases open, papers arranged with clinical precision. At the center of the table lay a thick document tabbed with colored flags. The final version. Howard Blake, lead counsel for the creditor group, glanced at his watch as Jonathan approached. "Mr. Reed," he said smoothly, standing just enough to acknowledge him. "Thank you for coming promptly." Jonathan nodded, lowering himself into the chair as if gravity had increased overnight. His tie was slightly askew. His jaw carried the rough shadow of a shave done too quickly. He placed his phone face down on the table to avoid watching the minutes drain toward market open. "Coffee?" Howard asked. Before Jonathan could answer, a waitress appeared at his side. She was young, mid-20s, perhaps. Dark hair neatly tied back, white apron pressed crisp against a pale blue shirt. Her name tag read Elena. Her expression was composed but observant, the kind of quiet attentiveness that came from watching people before speaking. "Good morning," she said gently. "What can I get for you?" "Black," Jonathan muttered. The lawyers ordered cappuccinos and sparkling water. Elena noted everything with quick efficiency and moved toward the counter. Howard slid the document forward. "We've incorporated the final revisions discussed last night. This agreement converts a portion of the outstanding debt into equity at a favorable valuation. It preserves operational continuity while ensuring creditor protection." Favorable. Protection. Continuity. Words designed to sound like rescue rather than surrender. Jonathan opened the document and began scanning the pages again. His eyes tracked the dense paragraphs, but the language felt slippery. He had reviewed versions of this agreement so many times in the past 48 hours that sentences had blurred into shapes rather than meaning. He trusted his legal team had vetted it thoroughly. They had assured him it was the best achievable outcome under the circumstances. Elena returned, placing cups carefully before each man. When she set Jonathan's coffee beside his hand, she noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He offered a thin smile. "Long week," she nodded, stepping back. But as she turned, her gaze caught a page of the document angled slightly toward her. Rows of figures were visible, valuation numbers, percentages, debt totals. She didn't mean to read it. Yet numbers had always drawn her attention instinctively. She moved toward another table, but the figures lingered in her mind. 80 million valuation. 24 million outstanding debt. 12.5% conversion. She frowned faintly. Back at the corner table, Howard tapped a paragraph with his pen. Clause 14.3 outlines the conversion mechanics. Standard framework. The creditors assume 12.5% equity based on current valuation metrics. If market conditions improve, everyone benefits proportionally. Jonathan skimmed the clause. He did quick mental math, but fatigue dulled the clarity. 80 million valuation. 24 million debt. He tried dividing in his head, but the numbers tangled. He had been awake since 3 a.m., reviewing projections that refused to align. "What time is it?" one of the other attorneys asked. 8:12, Howard replied. "Markets open at 9:30, but news leaks travel faster." Jonathan's pen hovered above the signature line. He thought of the employees, project managers, architects, interns fresh out of school, who depended on him. If he refused to sign, panic might ripple through the market. Stock could plummet. Vendors might pull out. Bankruptcy could become inevitable. If he signed, he would lose significant control, perhaps permanently. But at least the company would survive in some form. Elena returned to the counter, but her eyes drifted back toward the table. The numbers refused to settle comfortably in her head. 24 million was 30% of 80 million, not 12.5. Even accounting for valuation adjustments, something felt misaligned. She told herself it wasn't her place. These were corporate attorneys, executives, people who lived inside contracts thicker than textbooks. She was just serving coffee. Yet the discrepancy nagged at her. Jonathan leaned forward, pen touching paper. "Excuse me," Elena said softly. The word barely rose above the ambient cafe noise, but it cut through the moment. Four heads turned toward her. "Yes?" Howard asked, irritation flickering across his face. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden attention. "I don't mean to overstep. I noticed something on the document when I was serving coffee." Jonathan's pen lifted. Howard's expression tightened. "This is a confidential legal agreement." "I understand," she replied quickly. "I didn't read it intentionally. I just saw the numbers. The debt figure, 24 million, and the valuation at 80 million. The conversion percentage listed as 12.5% doesn't align mathematically. Unless there's an adjustment not visible on that page, the dilution should be closer to 30%. Silence settled heavily over the table. Jonathan stared at her as if she had spoken a hidden truth aloud. Howard forced a thin smile. "That's not accurate." Elena swallowed but held her ground. "I could be mistaken. I studied accounting for 2 years. It just stood out." Jonathan pulled the document closer, flipping back to the clause. His mind, jolted awake by the challenge, began recalculating with sudden clarity. 24 divided by 80. 30%, not 12.5, unless the post-conversion valuation was being calculated differently. He flipped further, scanning sub-clauses he had skimmed before. There, buried in dense phrasing, was an adjustment mechanism that recalculated valuation post-signature in a way that effectively increased creditor equity upon minor market fluctuations. His pulse quickened. "Explain this adjustment," he said sharply, pointing at the paragraph. Howard's composure faltered for the first time. "It's a protective measure. It's a control transfer trigger," Jonathan replied, voice cold now. The other attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Elena stood frozen near the table, unsure whether she had ignited something dangerous. Jonathan looked at her again, really looked this time. Not as a waitress, not as background, as someone who had seen what he, in his exhaustion, had missed. The pen no longer hovered near the signature line. It rested flat on the table. And at exactly 8:17 a.m., the deal that would have quietly stripped him of his company began to unravel. By 8:18 a.m., the calm, curated atmosphere of the cafe had fractured into something taut and electric. The low hum of espresso machines and soft instrumental music continued, but at the corner table, urgency had replaced ritual. Jonathan Reed no longer looked like a man bracing for surrender. He looked awake. "Get my counsel on the line. Now," he said, already unlocking his phone. Howard Blake's polite composure thinned. "There's no need to escalate this over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding doesn't bury a recalculation trigger 3 paragraphs deep," Jonathan replied evenly. Within seconds, his general counsel, Priya Shah, answered on speaker. Her voice came sharp and alert despite the early hour. Jonathan read the clause verbatim, including the valuation adjustment mechanism tied to post-signature liquidity events. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the rapid clacking of keys. "Jonathan," Priya said slowly, "if this is structured the way it sounds, a 5% market dip would automatically reprice equity allocation. They'd cross 51% within weeks." Howard interjected smoothly, "That's an extreme interpretation." "It's arithmetic," Priya shot back. The tension around the table shifted palpably. The two junior attorneys avoided eye contact. The cafe's morning light grew stronger, spilling across the polished table and illuminating the stack of documents that, minutes earlier, had seemed inevitable. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "Revise it. Remove the automatic repricing clause. Fix the conversion percentage to reflect transparent math. And extend repayment to 3 years instead of triggering quarterly reassessment." Howard checked his watch. "Markets open in an hour and 12 minutes. Investors expect stability. Then they'll appreciate transparency," Jonathan said coolly. The unspoken truth hung between them. The creditor group needed his signature before market open to prevent panic. A delayed signing could spook analysts. Headlines loved words like instability. But signing a predatory structure would guarantee his quiet displacement. Howard stood. We'll need 15 minutes. You have 10. The attorneys retreated toward the cafe's entrance, phones pressed to ears, voices low but urgent. Jonathan remained seated, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in days. His hands were steady now. The fog had lifted. Adrenaline replaced exhaustion. Across the room, Elena stood behind the counter, pretending to polish a row of already gleaming glasses. Her heart still pounded. She had replayed the moment in her head 3 times already, wondering whether she had jeopardized her job. Jonathan rose and walked toward her. You were right, he said simply. She looked up cautiously. I'm glad. You didn't hesitate. I almost did, she admitted. But numbers don't usually lie. People just arrange them creatively. Despite everything, Jonathan laughed, a short, surprised sound that startled even him. That's the most honest description of finance I've heard all year. He leaned against the counter. Up close, she could see the strain in his face, the sleepless shadows beneath his eyes. You said you studied accounting. For 2 years. I had a scholarship. She kept her tone matter of fact. I left when my father needed surgery. Tuition went to hospital bills. And since then, I work here. I manage the cafe's inventory and books on weekends. It's steady. Jonathan nodded slowly, absorbing the quiet resilience in her words. Behind him, the lawyers returned, tension written clearly now. Howard placed a freshly printed stack of documents on the table. We've amended Clause 14.3, he said tightly. The repricing mechanism has been removed. Conversion reflects fixed equity at 15% based on agreed valuation metrics. Repayment extended to 36 months. 15. Jonathan asked. A compromise, Howard replied. Jonathan sat, scanning each page with deliberate attention. This time he read every line, every footnote, every conditional phrase. He asked 2 clarifying questions, both answered carefully. At 8:43 a.m., he signed. The signature felt different, measured rather than resigned. Howard gathered the papers. We trust this resolves concerns. It does, Jonathan said calmly. Provided execution matches language. The attorneys left without further pleasantries. The cafe slowly returned to normal rhythm. Laptops reopened. Conversations resumed. The crisis that had nearly detonated before breakfast dissolved into quiet aftermath. Jonathan stepped outside briefly, phone in hand. At 9:15 a.m., a revised press statement was released. Transparent restructuring, preserved leadership, strengthened balance sheet. He watched the stock graph as the market opened. There was a brief dip, inevitable, but instead of plummeting, the line steadied. Then, gradually, it ticked upward. Investors preferred clarity over hidden traps. He exhaled, tension draining from muscles that had been clenched for weeks. When he returned inside, Elena was refilling sugar dispensers. You didn't have to do that, she said without looking up. Do what? Fight it. You could have signed and walked away comfortable. Most executives would. Jonathan considered that. Comfortable isn't the same as right. She met his gaze. Still, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. I meant what I said earlier. Finish your degree. I'll cover tuition. In exchange, you intern with our finance team. Her fingers hovered over the card. Why? Because you saw through something 3 seasoned attorneys expected me not to notice. He paused. Because instinct paired with skill is rare. And because I'd rather build a company with people who question numbers than people who decorate them. Emotion flickered across her face, surprise, relief, disbelief all tangled together. I'd have to reduce my hours here. Talk to the owner, Jonathan said. We'll make the internship paid. You won't lose income. She let out a slow breath, as if something heavy had just shifted in her life. Okay, she said softly. Yes. He extended his hand. She shook it, firm despite her lingering nerves. Outside, sunlight fully claimed the street. The frantic edge of early morning had given way to steady momentum. Delivery trucks moved on. Pedestrians filled sidewalks. The city had no idea how narrowly a corporate collapse had been avoided over coffee and croissants. Jonathan checked his phone one more time. The stock held steady. Analysts were already tweeting cautious optimism about responsible restructuring. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. At 8 this morning, he said thoughtfully, I was ready to surrender control of everything I built. Elena smiled faintly. At 8 this morning, I was worried about running out of almond milk. He laughed again, this time fully. Funny how timing works. She glanced at the stack of amended documents still visible through the cafe window. What would have happened if I'd said nothing? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He imagined the signature landing on the original page. The quiet shift in equity. The slow erosion of authority masked his collaboration. Within months, he would have been a figurehead in his own company. I'd be planning my exit, he said finally. And blaming the market. She nodded, absorbing the weight of that. Instead, he continued, I'm planning expansion once we stabilize. Carefully this time. Carefully, she echoed. There was something grounding about her presence, unfiltered by corporate politics, unmotivated by leverage. Just clarity. As he turned to leave, he paused. Classes start in 4 months, right? Yes. Good. Gives you time to brush up on valuation models. Her smile widened slightly. I never stopped practicing. He stepped out into the street, the air sharper now but no longer suffocating. The day stretched ahead, not as an ending, but as a recalibration. Inside the cafe, Elena tucked the business card safely into her apron pocket. For the first time in 2 years, the future didn't feel postponed. At 8 a.m., one man had nearly signed his own collapse. By 9:30, both of their trajectories had shifted, because someone refused to ignore a number that didn't add up.